Hello and welcome to Author Hour. I'm your host Richard Lyntton, author of North Korea Deception, Hyde Park Deception, and now, ta-da, third in the series, Leningrad Deception, which is available now. And we're going to turn the tables today. My friend and local author, CJ Milacci, has kindly agreed to interview me about the launch of my third book, Leningrad Deception. So I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm going to turn it over to CJ.
Oh, wonderful.
Thanks
Richard,
for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about your book and to dive into it. It's such a big deal to be at book 3 in the series, so congratulations.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. So when did you write book 3, and about how long did it take you to actually get to the end of this story?
Yeah, so the first 2 books took me about 10 years to write, and then book 3 pretty much took a year. So I started in April 2022. That's right, yeah, 2022, and then it came out April this year, 2023. So I religiously spent 2 or 3 hours a day. I would go for my walk and I sit by a river, beautiful river, and the water's flowing past, and I write a chapter in my car, actually.
Oh, wow.
It's my office, and I just love having the sound of the water. And then I work with my editor, and we spent about a year, and I actually also did something that I've never done before. I put it on Kindle Vella, which, if people don't know, is another Amazon platform that you can read chapter by chapter on your phone. So I did that as a sort of little incentive for myself to keep going.
Right.
So I put it up there, and then we added the chapters as we went.
How did that feel, using Kindle Vella? Was that overwhelming? Did you feel like it encouraged you in the writing process?
Yeah, no, it was a really interesting experience. I mean, I thought, is it worth it? And because, you don't get that much, you're not paid that much, you're paid per page or whatever it is. But I think the first 3 chapters are free. But yeah, it was funny for me, literally having, because I had the cover done already. I had that done in advance. And although if I'm being brutally honest, because the book Leningrad Deception is set in Leningrad, Stockholm, London, Venice, and Capri, and I sort of feel like if I'd really thought about it, I might call it Capri Deception. But as my books are a lot to do with Russia and the Cold War and Soviets and spies, I thought maybe it should be Leningrad Deception. And as people know, Leningrad is now St. Petersburg in Russia. So I stuck with Leningrad Deception because we had the cover done, but I kind of switched locations to Capri for some of the scenes. Okay. And I thought, well, maybe Capri would be more interesting or exotic for people to be enticed towards. But honestly, it doesn't really matter because it's I love the story. I'm pleased with the story. So. Right.
Do you find it difficult to have all these different locations that you're jumping into and out of as you're writing the story?
You know what, that I feel like the locations are kind of almost characters in my books, and we write, don't we? We write what we love to read. So I just always love, whether it was, I know, growing up watching James Bond. I remember one of the first movies I ever saw was Roger Moore in Live or Let Die. That was one of my first going to the movie theater, and I just love that idea of switching from not just towns within one country, but switching to countries. And then I love to try and contrast. So we go from Leningrad to Venice, to London. Hyde Park Deception book 2 goes into Sarajevo, Bosnia. And in fact, I just have to tell you a very incredible story. I just did a book signing at Barnes & Noble for the third book. And a nice couple came in and they said, oh, our daughter just went on an Eastern European tour. And so it turned out this was a local Catholic school here in the area, and she'd literally been to Plitvice Lake, Mostar, and Split, Croatia, which is where 3 of my scenes are set in Hyde Park Deception, because it's about the war in Bosnia. I said, oh my God, you have to buy this. Anyway, it was just so bizarre because it was like history turning full circle. Sure. I'd served in the British Army out there as a United Nations military observer, which is why I use many of these locations. Right. And then now this guy walks in, his daughter's just been on a historical tour of Bosnia. It was crazy.
Wow, that's so wild, but exciting. I'm sure when she reads your story, it will bring it to life in a new way.
And I said, you gotta, I said, just have her read the first couple of chapters, she'll get a kick, because it's in Split, Croatia, where she visited.
Sure.
And there's a nice chase sequence in Split, Croatia.
Oh, that's so neat. So since we're talking about Hyde Park Deception as well, how did writing Leningrad Deception compare with Hyde Park Deception and North Korea Deception?
Yeah, so I mean, probably like many writers, I mean, I kind of wrote the first two books together. So I was sort of writing one for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then I started on the next one. And it was a long process to answer your question. So it was like, it literally was, I think, 10 or maybe even 15 years. And the character, I had to go back in time because the first book is set in the Russian Far East. So it's set in London, Moscow, Vladivostok, and Pyongyang. And the protagonist is a British journalist. And then I realized that I wanted to use many of the places and experiences and the wars that I'd been in. So therefore I had to go back in time. So therefore book 2 is Jack Steele as a United Nations military observer in Bosnia. And then book 1, he's actually, book 3, Leningrad Deception, he's actually still at Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, but he speaks Russian. So he gets sent on this chase to Leningrad, and he becomes embroiled in a Vatican-inspired conspiracy to assassinate 2 world leaders.
Wow, it sounds so exciting. I get excited listening to it because I love those spy thriller stories.
Right, exactly.
But they are so high-paced, and there's so much moving parts, and they aren't short stories. So it looks like they're around 120,000, each. And so how does that work when you're planning out a novel like this? Because there's so many parts, like you said, you don't just have characters, you have places that are like characters. And how do you kind of take all of that and plan it and put it together in a way that's cohesive and keeps a reader turning the page?
Yeah, so I think I don't aspire to be, Charles Dickens, but I just want people to keep turning the pages, right? So Robert Ludlum, Daniel Silver, John le Carré, Frederick Forsyth are my sort of inspiration. And for me, the main thing is that people keep turning the pages. And so what I do is I write out not just the chapters, but the scenes. So scenes tend to be fairly short. That keeps people's interest. And then I literally have a plan, and it says, characters, scene, date, time. You've got to have the date, time, and country, because obviously that helps you. And I have day 1, day 2, day 3, so I know where, how many days we're going through in the whole story. And then I put a little word, and I say kick. What is the kick to get us through? Like people go, oh my God, what happened? What happens next? Kind of thing. So, and I do that. So literally, most of my books have about 100 scenes. So yeah, about 40 chapters and 100 scenes. And that's what I do. So I just have that little plan. And if I feel like, we've been in a fairly relaxed scene in a cafe in Sweden, then I suddenly maybe go to Moscow and go back to, the bad guy in Moscow doing something, or one of the scenes I thought, how can I make this scene a little bit more interesting? So I made this nasty villain kick a dog.
That'll get people's blood boiling.
Right, exactly. But yeah, so I just have that plan, and I don't necessarily stick to it. In fact, I was going to write one of the main sort of chase sequences was going to be in Berlin at the end, because one of my sort of fascinations and inspirations is the Cold War, and I was in the British Army when the Iron Curtain came down, and the East-West Berlin was fascinating to me. The fact that you could go on a metro, and you literally the metro is going through East Germany, and it doesn't stop at the station, and the lights were dimmed, and then it goes to the next station, which is West Germany. And so that idea of borders and fences and barbed wire and the fact that they had the mines and the dogs has always fascinated me. But anyway, I did start. Jack Steele was on vacation in Berlin in the beginning of the book. He goes to the Checkpoint Charlie Museum, which is a place I went to when I visited. But I then decided to switch the whole big denouement, the World Leaders Summit, where all the shenanigans take place, to the island of Capri. So I think people will enjoy that more than Berlin.
Sure.
Because I also found that I felt I didn't know Berlin as well as I needed to know it, to really include those last few chapters in Leningrad Deception.
Wow. So it's a lot of planning, but then kind of as you're getting into the story, seeing where that takes you, essentially. So how did that work with Kindle Vella? Did you find that you thought you knew what you were going to do next, and now you have a chapter you need to get out, and oh boy, it's all different than what you expected?
That's a great question. And amazingly, and I'm almost nervous to do it again for the very reason that you just said, and that is, I've already put it up there. And of course, there were some edits made, at the very end, but they weren't huge edits, so I was able to go back in to those chapters and change that. But amazingly, and I don't know whether it was just luck, but I was happy to stick with the plot and the story that went into Kindle Vella, and that ended up as the final book. But you're right, I hadn't finished the book before I'm putting it into Kindle Vella. So, I mean, I could have changed chapters, but I didn't on this occasion. But you're right, it could be a little bit tricky. But it's, like I said, the reason I did it was because it's nice to have an incentive to, like, I'm putting it up there for the public as I go. And people could even interact on Kindle Vella. Right. They can send you a note. Did you know that? Have you done it?
I haven't done it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
So anyway, it could be a problem, but it wasn't on book 3. So I'll see about book 4.
See if you'll
you're literally getting paid to write as well. Because I mean, I literally would get a few bucks each month from people reading my chapters. So this is like, oh great. So people are buying it. We're not talking huge amounts, but again, that's another little incentive that people are reading my chapters. And then maybe, I don't know, I feel like maybe people stop at 10 or 20 or 30 and then they say, okay, I'm going to just wait and buy the book. Right. I don't think most people buy the whole Kindle Vella book. And Kindle Vella is actually supposed to be, I think, mainly for shorter stories. But anyway, I just tried it as a platform.
That's great. So I know Kindle Vella has been something that's been talked about more, and these kinds of services where an author can put out a chapter or 2 at a time. But you're book 3 into your series. So you're an established author. You've done well. You've already gotten great feedback on your stories. Right. So how would you suggest a new author approach something like Kindle Vella? Is this something you would suggest for a new author, or wait until you're further
I think
in the industry?
Because it would just be too time consuming to start putting your book up and then having to take stuff down or change chapters. I would not recommend it for a new author, because it's like you've got to have your finished manuscript, highly polished, with all your readers and beta readers and So I wouldn't recommend it for a new author.
Because I think it is something that is becoming more talked about on the author scene. So it would be an easy thing for a new author to maybe think, oh, this could work. But again, it's different when you're established and you can finish a story, because that in and of itself is a big deal. So that's great. So kind of moving on from there, how do you then, you've got book 3, how does marketing look for book 3? Now you're further into the series. Is it different? What do you do for marketing now?
Yeah, so, book 1 was tough. Book 2 was a little bit easier, but people really seem to resonate with book 3. So I think, it's like anything, you've got to build those bricks, right? So the marketing, I have my newsletter, which every author has to have. And I like to give people numbers sometimes, but I have nearly, I think, 2,000 people on my newsreader letter. And I recently had a conversation with a New York literary agent just for fun. It was a friend of a friend. And I just, what would I need to get like a big publishing deal? And she said, well, you kind of need like 10 or 20,000 people on your newsletter. I was like, okay, I've got a little way to go. Right. But, marketing for me is, so you're going to send out your email, your newsletter, you're going to do Amazon ads, you're going to do Facebook ads, discount sites. There are things called book promos where authors kind of do, like, they clump together and they have like 10 or 20 authors, thriller authors, and they'll all put this newsletter, and there's a company called BookFunnel who does this for you. And so they'll for one day, or several days, sorry, they'll each author will market the newsletter. And it's kind of like a book promo. So those are like 2 or 3 of the things I do for the marketing.
So just coming back to the newsletter too, because that is such a vital thing. So 2,000 is a great number in most circles. I believe I had listened to a podcast and they said that most authors were under 500 newsletter subscribers. So how do you build that? Do you use things like BookFunnel to build your newsletter for someone who's kind of early on in the process? Well, what does that look like?
So that's nice. It's interesting you say that. It's nice that you say that, because I'm thinking, why can't I get it beyond 2,000? Because it seems to stick at that. Because what I do is, if you use MailerLite or MailerChimp, whatever it's called, but basically how you do that is, first of all, you've got to have links in your book to your website, and so people can sign up. So some people do that. The main technique I've used is from something called book sweeps.
Okay.
So book sweeps and BookFunnel. So these are two separate companies. I'll just say them again if people want to check them out. So BookFunnel, all one word, and then book sweeps. And they have things called newsletter builders. And so what you'll do is you'll offer a free copy of your book. And if the person wants your book, I think they have to give their email, and then you get at the end of the promo, you get like a list of, say, 100 or 200 people who downloaded your book for free. But in marketing, as people will know, as people know, an email is worth a lot, in monetary terms. And so, I've used those two companies, BookSweeps and BookFunnel, for newsletter building. I make sure all my links to my website are in the back of my books. And then you can also do things like, Facebook ads and Amazon ads. And I guess I should do more on trying to build that list. But I sort of feel like, I always think of it, what if it was me? Like, I know I want to be on Daniel Silver's mailing list, David Baldacci, some of these people who you really love. You just want to be on their list.
Sure.
So I guess I also feel that maybe, I don't know what the percentage is, maybe 50% or 30% is organic, and people are going to go to your website and sign up anyway. But there are definitely, for new authors, like I say, MailerLite, MailerChimp, I think, is that what it's called?
MailChimp,
not MailerChimp. It's like saying the Google, isn't it? So there are definitely ways of doing that for new authors, and you should and must do that.
Definitely. I completely agree with you. That's the thing that you can always control, right? So social media is something we tend to feel like there's this need to be on there, but you can't reach all of those people that are your followers. Whereas your email list, you can actually guarantee that every person on your email list found out that Leningrad Deception is now available. Yeah. They know when Hyde Park Deception or North Korea Deception are on sale, all of those things, and you can control that.
And the other great thing I did this time for the launch was that I reached out to my email list and I said, for anyone who'd like to be an advanced reader, I'll send you a copy of the book in exchange for an honest and fair review on Amazon.
Sure.
And you can do that. And you literally, some of the reviews that you'll see on Amazon that said, I received this book in exchange for a review. And so Amazon allows you to do that, which is really great. And so I literally had I think 20 or 30 people who read Leningrad Deception. And then on day one that it was published, I reminded them, and they put reviews up. Most of them were pretty good.
That's great.
Thank goodness, 4 or 5 stars, hopefully. But so that's another thing that you can use your email letter for.
That's fantastic. So, and then that's another way to interact with your readers. And is that something that you enjoy doing? Like that interaction with readers and
I think it's funny you say that, because I really enjoyed the last 2 book signings I've done. I met some really interesting people and really fun conversations. And even though it feels like a slog, it feels like, I've got to organize the next one, the next book signing. Once you do it and you're there with people who are either interested because they just found out about, or they pick up your book and they like the look of it, and then I give them the spiel. I say, you want the quick spiel or the slow spiel? And it's really satisfying. And I really do enjoy it. And then to get a nice, some of the times you read the reviews on Amazon, and whilst I tend not to read them in general, when you do see, if you check in every few weeks and you look at a review and someone really gets the book, I mean, that as an author, it's nothing more satisfying than getting, they got the book, they got that it's not. So I think I got a not so good review recently, and it says something like, not realistic. I'm like, what do you want?
Right,
The whole point is
right.
it's not realistic. This is it's a spy movie. I mean, it's a spy book. It's an international political thriller full of thrills, spills, and page turns. So what do you expect? Of course, it's not going to be totally realistic.
Sure.
But having said that, I do like to say that I like to put one toe over the line of incredulity. That's what I like to do. So in other words, I like there to be a certain amount of realism.
Sure.
But I allow myself that. But really, when you look at, you look at what's gone on in the war, like the war in Ukraine, for example.
Sure.
I mean, I spent time in Russia. I love Russians. I studied Russian. A lot of my books are based on experiences in Russia. And, I never thought that we would get to the stage where 20, 30 years later, after I was there, I mean, I studied there in the Reagan-Gorbachev era, which people will remember. That was when the Berlin Wall came down, the Cold War. It was a fascinating time to be there. Gorbachev was a hero. Ronald Reagan was a hero. But now, all these years later, now there's another war in Europe. Sure. It's just extraordinary to me.
Yeah. So do you find that when you do the book signings and everything, you get to have some of those conversations about what you've done and experienced and how that has influenced your writing? Yeah.
I mean, people will say, like, the lady came up to me the other day and said, I served in the military and my brother was in the military, and she said, North Korea Deception, that's my book. That's my book, she said, because she'd served in the American US Army in South Korea.
Wow.
And I said, yeah. And she said, and then there was the Gulf War I, and she said, and they didn't send me to that. But yeah, she so it's amazing, people do know about, older people probably more than younger, but people do know and appreciate the Cold War and history and European history. And so yeah, I mean, I guess those are the people that tend to be, to gravitate towards my books.
Yeah. And then since we've talked a little bit about book signings, how do you get a book signing? How is that something that you can even go about setting up and facilitating?
So I mean, I always advise people to you got to try and befriend a local indie bookstore, I would say, because and again, booked in Chestnut Hill, if people haven't been there, very welcoming. And there's Main Point Books here that I know does book signings for indie authors. So most independent bookstores will gladly either have a couple of copies of your books, or they will let you go in. One thing I don't like to do is I've tried a couple, is where they have these group signings. So there's like 10 authors. Sure. And I find that it's just not focused enough. Obviously there are book tours. You could probably work on setting up a book tour if you wanted the time and expense. Sure. But unless you're a big, multi-million-dollar author, bestseller, the publisher will then obviously organize your book tour and even an international book tour. But I find that it's definitely worth going to your local chain, Barnes & Noble in the area. You can go to more than one. Right. And they generally are really welcoming to independent authors, and also definitely, independent bookstores.
Great. That's good to know, because I think that's something that a lot of authors are interested in. So just having some ideas of how even to start that process, it's a great.
And you'd be surprised, like if you just go in and be professional, like, take a sales sheet. Like I have a sales sheet that's got my books on in color. It's a color photocopy, and there's my bio, my photo. So, if you do go into a bookstore, and again, don't even think about emailing or write or calling, because generally they're too busy.
Sure.
You have to present yourself in person, make that connection with the bookstore owner, and then like I say, generally they either have group signings or they'll invite you back for a single.
One last question for you, just because you just mentioned tanks, and they seem to pop up all the time in your stories. So why is that? Why do you love tanks so much? Yeah, I mean, it's funny, very quickly, because I know we're almost out of time, but I was a tank commander in the British Army, and at the Royal Military Academy, I learned about tanks and Russian tanks and T-72 tanks, and being inside a tank is kind of an extraordinary experience. You live inside a tank, and I feel like
I had to, because I'm a tank commander and I was in Gulf War I in my tank, and I spent a lot of time in tanks. I have to, and for people who don't know, tanks, are, so I was in a cavalry regiment, which is tanks, armored cars, armored reconnaissance, and horses, the ceremonial unit in London. And so I just find tanks big, extraordinary, massive beasts. But one final thought for you is that I never thought tanks would be still around now, right? I was in the army 20 years ago. And so now suddenly we see all these tanks, these T-72 tanks in the war in Ukraine. And we're seeing these Soviet tanks. And it's something I never thought that I would see in my lifetime again, especially not in the heart of Europe. And so I said to myself, well, I guess tanks are going to stay in my stories because they're still very relevant. Anyway, thank you, CJ. That is it. That is the end of Author Hour or interviewing yours truly. Just a quick mention of our very first. So here's my book, Leningrad Deception, is out now. And then the very first fiction book that Richard Lyntton and Milacci Media has published is a romantic comedy set in North London, The High Heel Gardener. Also, check that out. It's a really fun read. 4 Weddings and a Funeral meets the modern day climate crisis.